Some of you are old enough to remember the obnoxious middle schooler back in the late 70s who was always banging on the church pianos at inopportune times and making himself a real nuisance. And I'd just like to take this opportunity to publicly apologize for that. I am sorry. But I couldn't help myself. I was raised in a musical family, surrounded by songwriters and recording artists of word music in Waco, Texas. I had the gifted Gene Begg as a piano teacher. I had the blessing and encouragement of school music teachers and church youth leaders. And like most young musicians, I was bursting at the seams to play long before my music was worth hearing. Plus, it was an era when piano and keyboard players dominated the top 10. Elton John and Stevie Wonder were at the pinnacle of their careers. My first rock concert was to the old Greenville Memorial Auditorium to see Michael McDonald play with the Doobie Brothers. I'm not sure I'm allowed to say Doobie from the pulpit, but there it is. I saw the Billy Joel 52nd Street tour at Clemson's Little John Coliseum. I saw Chicago at Carowinds, Earth, Wind & Fire at Chastain Park. Michael W. Smith and Keith Green were bringing rock and roll keyboard playing to Christian music too. And for the first time, maybe ever, it was actually cool for a kid to be a musician. So just imagine my excitement when, in 1995, I found myself with record deal in hand, sitting at a grand piano in a beautiful Nashville studio, surrounded by the latest in high-tech studio equipment and the best musicians available, there to record my songs for a national release. It was a dream come true. The drummer clicked us off to play, and soon we were rocking, and I was in heaven. And then things ground to a halt. Something was wrong. Listening back, it was clear that somebody was playing too fast for the groove. Somebody was stepping on the bass line. Somebody was playing too much in general. And that someone was me. Untrained ears might not have been able to locate the culprit, but the professional players knew right away. And it was impossible for them to play their part with such an untrained person in the mix. I had written those songs. I had lived them and lived with them. I had performed them to appreciative audiences, I thought. But when it got down to playing with real musicians, we had to call in a session player for about half the songs on the record, because while I had learned to play, I had not yet learned when not to play. So somebody else played, and he played many fewer notes, but they were all better notes, because there was room for everyone else to play. In his letter to the Galatians, Paul is saying much the same thing to us about the life of the Spirit. The freedom to play, to do anything we want has been given to us. For freedom, he wrote, Christ has made us free. How beautifully that's worded. For freedom's own sake, for the sheer joy of it, Christ has set us free. Free from making sacrifices to appease the gods of our oppressors, or even the God of Israel. Free from religious obligations of all kinds. Free from having to earn our salvation. Free from class and race and gender, categories of all kinds that divide us and demean some and elevate others. That's over. Free from isolation. We are one in Christ. Free from slavery to sin, for anyone who can accept our acceptance and freely live. Thank God for all the freedom froms. But Paul chapter 5, verse 13, Paul is concerned about our freedoms for. We are free for, he says, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness. Free for generosity, gentleness, and self-control. All gifts, to be sure, but fragile gifts that, like all the best gifts, require something of us, our care and our participation, or we can't receive them. The degree to which we will be able to enjoy our freedom will be determined by whether we abuse it, like the freshman so unprepared for the freedom of campus life that his first frat party ends with a call to his daddy to come bail him out of jail, or the college freshman who embraces it, like the one I met who used her free time to go with friends and throw spontaneous curbside birthday parties for unsuspecting homeless people. Same freedom, same pursuit of joy, but used to be loving, joyful, peacemaking, patient, kind, generous, faithful, gentle, and still in charge of her faculties. All things they don't arrest people for generally. That is spiritual freedom, and when you've got it, you can't lose it. When you've got it, you can't lose it to mere circumstances. You can be imprisoned in chains like Paul and set people free all over the Mediterranean. Or like Nelson Mandela, you can emerge from 27 years chained to the rock pile on Robben Island with enough joyful, creative energy still in you to lead an oppressed people to freedom. Paul is eager to help us understand spiritual freedom because it is the most potent freedom on earth. This year, on this Sunday before the 4th, we're celebrating freedom with jazz, the only true indigenous American music, invented by the first generation liberated from slavery. It was the artistic exultation of the first generation in 400 years to no slavery, to no freedom. So powerful was this music that it became the soundtrack of the 20th century for people of every race and every class. So potent, it gave birth to social and political movements. It gave birth to R&B and modern pop and rock and roll. It is social justice music. It's played from the lowliest street corner to the great concert halls of the world. If you don't get jazz, maybe you just haven't been set free yet. Jazz is freedom's music, and in pure jazz, the players come to the session without knowing what's about to happen. Isn't that something? Untrained ears may only hear a bunch of people playing a bunch of notes. No structure, just virtuosity. And most people think you're either born with that or you're not. They have no idea how a person could actually prepare or rehearse to play improvisational music. How can you rehearse for a part you've never played? The great paradox of both jazz and life in the Spirit is that what seems to have no rules is, once you get inside the experience, actually very much ordered and very much bound to limitations. Jazz players will all tell you the same thing. The ability to improvise is the product of rehearsing within strict limitations. That's a profound insight for those of us trying to live in the Spirit. The question, how can you rehearse for a part you've never played, that's also the disciples' question, isn't it? How do you rehearse for a part you've never played? How do we follow where we don't know where we're going? Our ability to improvise something beautiful in the chaos of our unpredictable lives will be the product. It will be the product of living within chosen limitations. Today, let me just give you 3 of those as a jazz musician might describe them. The first way you prepare to play freedom's music is through mastering the fundamentals. A sports coach might say you've got to master the fundamentals to be able to perform under the big lights. In jazz, your instrument has to be cared for. Your embouchure, your musculature, your chops have got to be in good condition. Musically, you've got to master the basics before you can go beyond them. You've got to know your scales before you can alter them. You've got to obey the rules before you know how to break the rules. You have to choose the limitations of the fundamentals now to experience the freedom of improvisation later. One of our responsibilities as the body of Christ is to keep practicing the fundamentals of the faith too. It is our responsibility to know well the biblical foundation, to observe the sacraments faithfully, to respect traditions, to do some things we may not like or understand until the understanding comes to us. We practice the fundamentals, and not so that we'll wind up fundamentalists, people who think the fundamentals will save us. No, we practice the fundamentals not because they're all there is to faith, but because they are our preparation for the improvisations that life requires. Sooner or later, we all figure out that the Bible is not a how-to manual for living trouble-free the simple steps of God's big, beautiful plan. Life requires improvisation, throwing change after change and curveball after curveball after us, and you've got to keep dancing. And for that, you've got to be in shape. Fred Craddock, the eminent theologian at the prestigious Candler School of Theology, says he's been served all his life by the memory verses he was taught in Vacation Bible School. A, all we like sheep have gone astray. B, be ye kind one to another. C, count it all joy when people persecute you. D, draw close to God and God will draw close to you. E, every child is known by his doing. F, for God so loved the world. Do you know and do you practice the fundamentals? How will you be able to use them in new and unanticipated ways when you need them? How will you give reason for the faith that you have when a child or an enemy or a neighbor asks? If there's no prayer in your life, how will you deal creatively with life's inevitable anxieties and angers and fears? If there are no relationships cultivated of unconditional love in your life, to whom will you turn when life turns on you? You know, as a kid, I thought church was boring. Now I understand it's because a lot of what we do here is practice, and I always hated practice. But it's how we rehearse for life, for experiencing the joy of being ready to play our part whenever life calls upon us to improvise. Basics. Number 2, the second thing you do to learn to prepare to play freedom's music is, well, I'll put it this way. When I took my son to meet the best session player in Nashville, I asked him to tell Christopher the single most important thing any studio musician had to know. And he said without hesitation, pocket. You've got to stay in the pocket. In jazz, blues, R&B, gospel, pop rock, groove is everything. Feel is everything. Play wrong notes if you must. Lay out if you have to. But if you get ahead of the groove or drag it down, you have committed jazz's unpardonable sin. You have to be utterly in the moment. You could make the case, reading the Christian mystics, that all spirituality is designed to teach us that, to stay in the pocket, to play in the groove, to pace ourselves, to be able to live in the present moment as it comes. Not to borrow regret from the past or anxiety from tomorrow, to live in the moment. Some of you run so far ahead of yourselves, and you know who you are, that you regularly have to take sick leave to get yourself back to a humane pace of life and work. And the Spirit is always calling us from chronos, that chronological time, that circular race we will never win, to kairos, God's time, in which things happen according to their meaning and their purpose in the will of God. And that does not happen without Sabbath rests and holy silences and sacred stillnesses. Kairos, like a jazz player, reminds us there can be no music without the rests. Finding the Spirit's groove is hard for us because it requires two things at once, that we expend effort and that we surrender. It's part self-assertion and part obedience. But you've got to choose the limitation of the groove to experience the freedom of improvising. And finally, when you're playing jazz and you've been given the freedom to play anything you want, you've got to know when not to play. How do you do that? I've told before the story of Wynton Marsalis' visit to North State University, where the students eat, sleep, and breathe jazz, where they engage in cutthroat competition to get in the better band, where lifelong musical careers can be founded upon your rank as a player at graduation. The students were beside themselves with excitement that they might be heard by the great Marsalis, who is revered in multiple genres, but was weaned on New Orleans jazz. His blessing would mean everything. His taking notice might mean a job. And the master's class gathered, and the students began to play, and they played every note they knew. They played loud and long. They showed off everything they had to show and waited for his approval. And Marsalis quietly walked up to each member of the band who had soloed and said, "What were the other instruments playing while you were playing your solo?" One after another, he asked that question, and nobody had an answer. And then he said, "Unless you're listening more than you're playing, you aren't playing jazz." You learn when not to play, not to speak, not to act. By listening more than you're playing, by listening to the music the Spirit is making, by hearing first what the people around you are doing, of thinking as much about what they need and want as about what you need and want, so that you can know how to contribute to the music in ways that supports it for all concerned. Isn't that the way Jesus taught us to live? Jazz is a microcosm of the church. This is not a solo enterprise. The task is not to eradicate our differences. It is to get us all improvising in a cooperative rhythm toward a common goal. It's not to make all the instruments sound alike or play the same part, but to make sure each of us contributes to the music in a way that serves the whole. In Galatians 5:25, Paul calls this living in the Spirit and being guided by the Spirit. And the way we know the Spirit, of course, is that its other name is love. So 3 things to remember. Choose the limitation of the basics. Choose the limitation of the groove. Choose the limitation of listening first. Jazz is the music of the Spirit. This week, we said goodbye to my lifelong friend and many of yours, Ed McKnight Jr. He was a brilliant man, husband and father, expert in his field, who suddenly found himself in a 2-year battle with ALS. And suddenly the whole family system was having to improvise their way into a future nobody wanted. His life plan out the window, the clock ticking away the seconds of his life. What did he do with his time? He made no impulsive, radical changes, no grand gestures, no trip around the world, no shouting his life philosophy to everybody on the internet. He spent time with his boys. He stayed at work. Eye gaze technology enabled him to keep teaching long after he could move a muscle. So he kept investing in his students, grading their papers. He was still teaching his classes, get this, even after he could no longer hold his own eyelids open. You think you've got limitations. But Ed never complained. He practiced the basics of his life, because life is a titanic struggle under any circumstances, and in extreme circumstances, in severe limitation, just being true, just being faithful, just being present is the stuff heroes are made of. And Ed McKnight is my hero. His message to the rest of us at his funeral, you won't be surprised, was go home and hug your families as he wished he could do. Do the basics. Be present in the moment. Be faithful. Love one another. That's the heartbeat of life. It's the key to making art out of tragedy, jazz out of limitation. And you know he's right. For freedom, Christ has made us free. Be careful, though, how you use it. Choose love. Spiritual freedom is the most potent freedom on earth. You know, I can laugh now about my first studio experience, but it wasn't funny then. Had you come to me that day in 1995, I would have cried, my life as a musician is over. I have no idea what I'm doing. But what I know now is that right then, on that very day, when I was dispossessed of the delusion that I knew what I was doing, and I was forced to go back to practice the basics and feel the groove and listen more than I played. Well, that was the day my life as a musician began.